perfect. Not too echoey. My name is Ashe Dryden. Before we get started, I'm going to let people sit down real quick. But before we get started, I need some audience participation. Yay! Woo! All right. So if you are able to stand up or raise your hand if you are involved with Rails Bridge, Rails Girls, Girl Develop It, Black Girls Code, related programs like that, if you teach programming, or if you are a mentor, or if you in any way help someone new get into programming or into Ruby or Rails, please stand up or raise your hand. Or both. Can you give these guys a round of applause, please? Thank you. So I'm talking today about diversity in tech. It's something that is really important to me and something that I've been very lucky to be able to talk to a lot of people about lately. Like I said, my name is Ashe Dryden. I'm Ashe Dryden pretty much everywhere on the internet. A lot of the information that's in my slides I also tweet about on a regular basis, so if you're interested in learning more, you can check out my website or my Twitter stream. So just to set a baseline, I want to talk about what diversity actually is. A lot of times when we have this conversation, it's kind of code for where are all the women. And it's important to remember that diversity is more than gender. It's actually more than just the binary of male and female. It's people compromising various backgrounds, experiences, and lifestyles. So it's a lot more than gender. It's a lot more than what we've been talking about lately. The other thing to note is that it's not always visible. There are a lot of things that are diverse about a person that you can't see from the outside. There are a lot of disabilities, physical and mental health aren't always visible, your economic class, which really impacts a lot of people who are in programming, and education. So, got some pretty little bubbles. So this is a selection of some of the ones that are larger groups that we talk about on a regular basis. And just so we can kind of set a baseline so we can have this conversation and kind of know each other's language, I want to set some vocabulary terms. The first one is intersectionality. This is a big word, and if you know me for any amount of time, you've probably heard me spout this word quite a few times. Intersectionality is basically all of these traits about a person and how they interact and how society treats them for the way that those things interact. So when we were looking at those pretty little bubbles before, the way that those things overlap, kind of like a pancake, that kind of is what society decides your experience in life is going to be. So for instance, if we look at, in the United States, women earn 80.9% of what men do. And that's a pretty big difference, and that's better than it has been actually in the past 4 years. That number has actually gone down, unfortunately. But this is for controlling for all of the factors, including education, time in and away from the industry. So that's terrible, and it makes me really sad, especially as a woman. But with intersectionality in play, when you look at Latina women, they make 59.3% of what white men make. That is a huge difference. So just those two traits in play, being female and being a woman of color, makes you earn almost half as much as a white man. Big deal. In the United States, depending on who you trust for these statistics, the unemployment rate is about 7.5%. For the blind community, it's 10 times that. Huge, huge difference. So privilege is the next term that we're going to cover really quick. And privilege is basically an unearned advantage you get for just being born the person that you are or having the traits that you do. So for instance, I have a lot of privileges. I'm very privileged in a lot of different ways, including the fact that I'm white. That's probably the biggest one in the United States. I appear to be straight. I speak English as a first language. I'm middle class. I'm able. So there are a lot of things that you can see about me that gives me a lot of privilege. Having privilege doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. It just means that because we get these extra things from society just for being this person, we have to keep in mind what those things are, and because we get them, who is not receiving them. So I was talking to somebody earlier this weekend, and I was talking about if we have $100 in the middle of a table, privilege is I get 95 of those, and you get 5. So specifically because of who I happen to be, I will get more, and that means that you are getting less. So there's this huge inequality. So some of the things that you get just for being privileged include things like better education, access to technology at an early age, which is really important in our field specifically, getting paid higher, being assumed to be competent. That is a really big deal when you're looking at when people go to interview for jobs. That is a really big deal when you're talking about going to conferences and people will ask you what you do, and as a woman will assume that I'm not a programmer. Quality of social and professional network. One of the greatest indicators for a child going into a STEM field, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, which are usually lumped together, is whether or not the child's father was also in STEM fields. Because that father has access to a network that allows them to get into good schools, allows them to go to libraries, to have a computer in their home, to talk about things that are important when it comes to things in STEM. You're also seen as a skill set instead of traits. So this could be something like identifying as a geek versus somebody identifying me as a girl geek. We automatically assume that the word geek, and this is just a lot of what we do in our society in general, we have these stereotypes in mind. So we assume geek means white male, generally youngish. And then the last one is being able to easily fit into or identify with a subculture. So being able to go into a culture and say, oh, we have a geek culture here, which generally tends to mean what? We play video games, we like board games, we like to stay up late coding in dark rooms, we probably drink a lot of caffeine, and a lot of people don't necessarily identify with that. It makes them feel different on the outside. So the next vocab term is stereotype threat. And we learned earlier about stereotypes from Sandy, wherever she is. Hey, call back to Sandy, awesome. So stereotype threat is if there exists a negative stereotype about a group of people, there is a threat a concern from that person that they might actually meet that threat. So I'm sure that most people have seen this comic before. And I'm going to describe what the slides are, and I'm usually going to read the slides because there are a lot of people that aren't necessarily visually impaired that won't otherwise be able to get the context. So on the left-hand side, you have two men at a whiteboard doing math, and one man says to the other, wow, you suck at math. And on the other side, you have a man and a woman, and the woman is doing math, and the man says to the woman, wow, girls suck at math. It's actually, studies have actually shown that if you prime women specifically going into a math test saying, you know, women tend not to do as well on math. Did you know that? They will do less well. If you don't prime them, they'll do just as well or better than their male counterparts. So this is something that they can't necessarily affect for themselves. It's something that society has decided for them and puts on them, and it's that extra stress of not being able to perform or basically being judged and having all of the people in their group also being judged in the same way. So the last vocab term is, I don't remember which of these waters is mine, so sharing germs with someone. So the last one is imposter syndrome. And this is actually something that affects everybody. This is being unable to internalize your accomplishments. So you might hear somebody say, I'm not good enough to speak at a conference, or I'm not good enough to apply at GitHub. I don't know enough. And they might be a brilliant programmer who's worked in the industry for a long time, has a lot of really brilliant things to say, but they just can't, and other people might also say that to them, but they just can't make themselves feel that inside. This is especially pronounced when we're talking about people who have negative stereotypes that exist about them. And it makes them less likely to apply for certain jobs, especially in groups where competency has to be proven. It also makes them less likely to submit talks to conferences and less likely to even attend a conference. Because these people are not like me. I'm going to go there and I'm not going to understand anything that they're talking about. Somebody is going to point out that I don't belong there. It's a really scary feeling. Actually, I lied to you. There is one more vocab term, marginalized. So marginalization, if you think about the margins on a paper, on a college rule paper, you have that pink line, and outside of there's a very skinny, narrow area where you can write things. It's kind of the same thing when we're talking about the area of people. So marginalization is basically taking somebody and pushing them to the side and ignoring the things that they need or they desire just because they're outside of the default or the normal. And society teaches us to do this with everyone within marginalized groups. And I know many of you are probably thinking things like this right now. I'm different, I'm logical, I don't have to share germs, thank you. The best. So you might be thinking things like, I'm different, I'm logical, and I'm rational. I don't see gender or race. please don't raise your hands, but think about a time where you may have said this. I know that in a past life, I have personally said these things. And it's interesting because the people who we hold up in our society as being the most logical and the most rational, people like scientists and professors at universities that study STEM and teach STEM, actually also do this to each other. There's this experiment that was done at either Yale or Harvard, I can't remember, where they gave 2 resumes to 2 different sets of people, and they said, let us know who you would rather hire. The resumes, they didn't tell the groups, were exactly the same. The only difference was the name. And they said, on a scale of 1 to 7, tell us who you would rather work with, let us know how much you would pay the person, and give us some adjectives about how you would describe each of these people. So one resume is John, the other one is Jennifer. Again, exact same resume, the only difference is the name. The groups came back, and John was given a 4 for on the scale of 1 to 7 of whether they would like to work with this person. And Jennifer, again, exact same resume, 3.3. So exactly the same resume. They also asked, how much would you like to pay each of these people? Jennifer was paid 87% less. Now, something that I left out of this story is that marginalized people do this to each other too. So those 2 groups that they asked to look at these resumes were mixed gender groups. So there were women in these groups. They were making the exact same assumptions and paying women exactly less and rating them exactly less than their male counterparts. It's kind of insidious, right? Makes me sad. So how diverse is the industry? Here's a pretty recent graph, and you can take a look that some of these bars are a little bit off. So if you take a look at the green or the blue bar up on the top versus the black bar being the US population, women are in the industry at about half of what they are in the general population. What's really worrying is the Hispanic population, which represents about 1/3 of who is actually in the country. So those are actually, Hispanic and Black communities are actually the most underrepresented communities in tech. All right, so let's take a look at something very specific. And a lot of these examples, unfortunately, are specifically related to gender, specifically related to women, because that's where a lot of the funding for this research comes from. But this isn't only a problem when it comes to women. So I make up about 24% of the industry, as I noted before, but only 3% of open source contributions. So think about what this means when we have companies that are requiring open source contributions to even apply. Does that person basically even exist in the field that you're looking for them in? If you're also requiring that they have a computer science degree, considering that women make up about 18% right now of computer science graduates, and that number is actually falling dramatically since the 70s, the person that you're looking for that is an open source contributor and has a computer science degree is a unicorn. It's very unlikely that this person exists, that this person doesn't already have a job because somebody has probably already snapped them up as paying them way more than you're willing to pay them. So they won't be available to actually apply for your job. So when you say things like, I would love to hire women, but none of them ever applied, this might be something that's stopping them. And I have talked a lot about the United States, but this isn't only a problem in the United States. If we take a look at computer science graduates in countries around the world, we see statistics like this. India has about 8% of women that graduate. The United States is 17%. The UK is 18.2, getting a little better here. France and Brazil are both at 20. South Africa is at 25. And I get to this point in a lot of conversations with people, and they'll say, you know, maybe women just aren't interested in programming then. You know, it's obvious that they don't want to go into it because otherwise, you know, they would put themselves out there, they would go to school, they would do the same kind of work that I had to do to get to where I am today. But it's interesting to note that programming in general actually used to be a women-specific job. The word computer actually comes from a job that a woman used to do. The first compiler and programming language were written by women. It's actually interesting. I'm the second female programmer in my family. My grandmother is also a programmer. So yay, grandma, pretty awesome. And I didn't know this until I was a little bit older, and I started talking to her about, you know, I'm in this field, and there really aren't any other women there. Like, it's kind of weird to walk into a room, and I'm the only woman in the room. And she's telling me this story about how in the 80s, she lives in Chicago. In the 80s, she got into programming and went to school just like everybody did in the 80s, specifically for programming. And she worked at one of the largest insurance companies in the country. And all of the other programmers were women, which already sounds really unusual to you, I'm sure. All of the other programmers are women. All of them sit in the middle of the office in a huge insurance company that takes up multiple floors of a skyrise in Chicago. And they sit in a cage, locked from the inside. Super weird, right? And I said, well, that seems really strange to me. It's like you're zoo animals. And she said, well, it was locked from the inside because we had to be protected from the men on the outside because harassment and people touching us was such a big deal. It happened so frequently that this is the only way we could get our work done. Like, so have we come far? Yeah, I'm very glad I don't have to work at a cage every day, thankfully. But we still have a lot of issues where women are leaving the industry at a really high rate, and far fewer women are getting into it. So the other thing that people will note is, you know, well, maybe women's brains just aren't formed right for them to be good at programming. You know, because there's evolutionary advantage to being able to write Ruby. You know, we know that if we don't write well, then a cheetah will get us and eat us, and we won't be able to procreate, and we won't have little Ruby babies. So, but as was mentioned earlier, there's been research that shows there's no physical or biological difference that impacts a person's ability to be a programmer. This crosses race, this crosses gender. There is nothing about you being born that makes you good at being a programmer. Nothing. We are all born without any knowledge of programming, and it's something that's learned. So the good news about this is that means that all of these problems are purely social and cultural constructs. That means that we can change them, which is actually a really good thing to hear. This is something that doesn't have to exist this way forever. And one of the statistics that I didn't lump in that group with the countries that I was mentioning earlier was Bulgaria, which is 73% of the people that graduate with computer science degrees are women. Compare that with the 17% in the United States. So out of curiosity, show of hands, how many people have thought about Bulgaria this week? Awesome, my hero. Of course it was Katrina, of course. So Bulgaria has really gotten to this place in the past 20 years, once they kind of pulled themselves out of poverty and started sending more people to schools. And they have such a strong ethic for sending people into STEM fields. It's something that they recognize is really important to rebuild their country, to put themselves on the map for a population that's extremely intelligent and knows what they're talking about and can innovate. And they have so many women that are going into computer science. So we can get better. This is a positive trend for them, so we can get better as well. So why does diversity matter to you? Looking out in the audience, I don't see a lot of visual diversity. There are a lot of white, presumably straight men that are abled, and that's what the vast majority of our industry looks like. And so how does this affect you? How does it affect your everyday life if you don't have to worry about getting paid 50% of your other colleagues do? How does it affect you personally? Well, I assume that the vast majority of people in here work or are going to work eventually. And working in a team that's diverse actually means that the company you work for has greater sales revenue, number of customers, market share, and profits relative to its competitors when your racial and gender diversity workforce increases. So if your company is making more money, that means you can make more money. So because I'm making less money, you're making less money. Kind of sucks, right? Not so cool. So groups with greater diversity can also solve complex problems better and faster, and that's kind of what we do for a living, right? So having more people that are able to think outside the box, that are able to do things that are differently than us, to bring a different perspective to the team, means that we can do our jobs better. Diverse teams are more creative and stimulated through persistent exposure to minority viewpoints. So we can do things that non-diverse teams can't do. We make better decisions, we generate more innovation, and considering the fact that we're on the forefront of innovation basically in the world, this is super important. So if the financial success and viability of your company that you work at or the company that you've started is directly dependent on the amount of diversity within your workforce, why aren't you hiring more diverse people? Diversity also matters to society. This is something that actually appeals the most to me, because to me, the lack of diversity is a moral issue. I want everybody to have equal access. I want everybody to be able to come into the community and enjoy what I enjoy. I want everybody to be able to walk through the doors of this conference and be greeted by the friends that they haven't seen since last year and get a hug. You can't get that in every industry. I want everybody to be able to experience that. So we make a lot of money, like way more than most people our age should be making, depending on who you ask, right? And we have a lot of people outside the industry that probably went to school longer than us, may have more debt than us, have more people to take care of than we do, and they're getting paid less, and they have fewer opportunities. In the United States alone, there are 1.5 million jobs that are going what is the word I want? They are remaining open because we can't fill them. We don't have the people to put in seats. That's why we have people competing over, programmers that we see just coming out of computer science programs or just coming out of programming schools, because they need them so badly. They can take the time to train them. So if we're actually looking at bringing in people outside the industry that need the money so much, that are in a class that's lower than probably the majority of ours, and bringing a lot of people out of poverty, we can start actually to heal the unequal pay that we've had in this country for a very long time. And doing that creates class mobility. And that's something that's important to me because in the world today, the class that you're born into, the socioeconomic class that you're born into, is more than likely the class you will die in. The class you're born in is the class that your parents were born in. It's extremely unlikely that you will escape that. So if we can take somebody out of high school and we can train them in the things that we do, and we can have them on their first job making probably more than their parents have made in the past 10 years in their first year, think about what that can do. Additionally, the wage gap is a lot smaller in STEM fields. So I mentioned before that women in the general population earn 80.9% of what men do, but in tech it's 87%, so that's better. So what's interesting about this is, too far. Here we go, 87%, okay. What's interesting about this is women who have STEM degrees, whether or not they choose to continue to work in STEM, will continue to make more than their non-STEM degree counterparts by 30%. So are STEM field degrees still important? Yeah, definitely. Do they still necessarily relate to the jobs that we do every day? Maybe not. But as somebody who's in a marginalized community, seeing stats like that means a lot. So why do we have a lack of diversity? Pipeline is one of the bigger issues, and this is something that a lot of people are working on. I've had a lot of people ask me, I have daughters, how do I get them to care about computers? And like I mentioned before, just being a dad and just being there and just being at home and just exposing your children to computers, just exposing them to your friends, to the kinds of things that you're passionate about, helping them get their way on the journey of learning about something that's really important and playing with things and experimenting, increases their odds so much of going into this field. But we have issues like culture cues that tell us that geeks only look a certain way. We have things like the differences in toys that we give boys and girls when they're children, that says, one of you is supposed to use your imagination and build something you've never built before, solve a problem. And then the other, we have a toy you can't do very much with. Walk around with it, put different clothes on it. There's actually an awesome toy that came out pretty recently called Goldie Blocks, which if you have a little girl who's, I think, under age 9, you should look it up. It's a toy that actually gets girls to start engineering with a really simple, fun toy. We also don't have any famous role models that represent us. If you ask anybody to talk about the people that have come before them and the people that have really set the stage for what we do every day, they'll name a lot of men. A lot of white men, a lot of American men, a lot of British men, and they look a lot alike. We don't have a lot of people that are similar to us that are doing really amazing things in this field. will.i.am was talking recently about how he's trying to do a lot of different things and make it very visible to the Black youth community because he wants kids to be able to see that they can experiment and they can try different things and they can fail at them and that's fine, and they can get up and try something else. Not having access to technology, as I mentioned before, is a really big detriment to a lot of people. Boys get access to their first computer at the age of 11, on average. Anybody get theirs earlier? Girls get theirs at 14. So imagine when you were back in puberty, I know it's super hard and painful, what you were doing around that time. Who started programming around the age of 11 or before? Okay. All right, okay. And when we're looking at along racial lines, there are lower computer ownership rates and broadband adoption among African American and Hispanic households. But in the last 10 years, we've also seen that those same communities adopt smartphones at a much higher rate, which begs the question, how bad is the mobile experience of your app right now, of whatever you're running? Imagine that is the only internet you see every single day. Can you do all the things that you do on your desktop app, on your mobile app? Think about how painful that is to only being able to access that. So we also don't have access to quality education at the same rate. Quality high school education is one of the greatest indicators of earning potential. And when we're looking at the fact that we have a very high dropout rate for certain populations in the United States, we have a lot of poor neighborhoods with poor schools. I went to a school where we didn't have desks for enough kids, so I sat on the floor for a lot of my classes. There is a huge problem with being able to focus, being able to retain good teachers, to get new textbooks, to have access to computers or broadband internet in schools. We're shutting down libraries, which means a lot of neighborhoods don't have access to computers at all. Schools in poor neighborhoods have lower quality math and science programs. There's a 25% difference between the readiness of African American and Hispanic students in science and math as compared to white students. So when you're going to college and they have you test out of certain classes, or they see that you have AP classes on your report cards and your transcripts, that means you're automatically being bumped up, where an entire other population is being sent to remedial classes to be able to learn these things. And these classes cost a lot of money, right? Like, how much money did you spend on college classes? Having access to healthcare is something that's getting increasingly worse in the United States. People of color, people with disabilities, and LGBTQ people have less access to quality healthcare. Now think about having to change jobs when you have finally gotten healthcare that you might pay a lot for, but you can now get medications that might save your life. That you can be at work and you won't have a seizure that will kill you when you're sitting at your desk. That's a pretty big deal. I mean, that's something that a lot of people are hesitant to take risks for because it could literally mean them dying, having to change a job. Women are more likely to be caregivers of children and elderly or ailing relatives. So they have these people that they have to take care of, and switching health insurance might mean that their children and their other relatives are going to lose the care that they're getting, that they don't have access to hospice care for elderly family members. The second area is attraction. How are we actually getting people to look at the things that we're doing and wanting to come and do the same things that we do? Like I mentioned before, there's a lack of role models, and we don't really see a lot of people representing us in companies and conferences. And when you think about the fact that a lot of us tend to know people that are like us, we have a hard time empathizing with people that are in different life situations with us that we don't necessarily understand because we've never experienced it, or we've never spoken with somebody that's experienced that same thing. Also, and I've spoken about this one publicly, I think a number of people have heard me talk about this one before, but the Geek Stereotype, and this is one of the more interesting papers I read recently. They took a group of women that were in a technical college, and they brought somebody who met the Geek Stereotype in to teach them something. And then 6 months later, they checked to see how many of those women had dropped out of that program. And regardless of that person's gender who came into, that represented the geek stereotype that came in to teach them, they were far more likely to drop out, and they were less interested in going into computer science because that person met the stereotype that wasn't like them. This is somebody, this is somebody that I don't think that I could get along with. That, am I going to have friends when I go into this industry? Like, if people are so radically different from me, am I going to feel welcome? Am I going to feel like I belong? And that last area is attrition. And this is the one that scares me the most. 56% of women leave tech within 10 years. I'm very lucky and very privileged that I've been able to avoid this. I've been in tech for about 12 years. But this is twice the attrition rate of men. That's really big. And it's really scary to me. I mean, I talk to a lot of women that are interested in getting into tech. I spoke with a 15-year-old girl, actually, last weekend about what she was interested in and the kind of invention and fun things that she was doing to try and figure out what she wanted to do with her life. And I told her the kinds of things that I talk about and the kinds of things that I've been educating people about, and I told her the statistic, and she said, okay, I'm determined to beat that now, which is really hopeful for me. But I can definitely see how the years have worn me down, and there have been definitely a lot of situations where I've thought, this might be the thing that sets, me off the edge, and I just can't handle it anymore. And thanks. Harassment is a huge issue. Like I mentioned before, my grandmother worked in a cage, literally in a cage, and I'm lucky that I don't have to do that. But we have a different kind of harassment going on. A lot of it is very subtle. For instance, people in marginalized groups are twice as likely to be harassed or mistreated. And a lot of people outside that group, outside those groups, don't recognize that it's happening. I have been in so many situations, specifically at conferences, where something has happened to me and somebody has said something really inappropriate, and I'm shocked because I can't believe a human being would do something like that to someone else. And the other people that were standing with me will turn around and walk away. I've never had somebody stand up and say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. Actually, I take that back. I had somebody do it yesterday, so thank you, which was really awesome. But over the past 12 years, that's the one incident where somebody has stood up and say, hey, that's not okay. 12 years. So when we say things like, I've never seen somebody get harassed, it must not happen at the rate at which you're saying. What you're saying to them is, I don't believe you. How many incidents have to be reported before we take this issue seriously? Discrimination is a huge issue. Like I mentioned before, we have an issue with pay. There's a big difference in who we pay what, but also in advancement and job offers, who we offer jobs. For instance, in Silicon Valley, men are 2.7 times more likely to be promoted to mid-level, women are just as likely to be promoted to mid-level jobs as men, but men are 2.7 times more likely to be promoted to senior positions like vice president or senior management. The only difference being gender. This accounts for things like the amount of time that they've been out of the industry or may have taken off for children. 2.7 times more likely to be promoted. So, really quick, I'm promoting you to my army. So congratulations, you've all been enlisted. Woo! You don't get any special sheriff badges or anything, it's kind of invisible, but really quick. So the change starts with us. We're really lucky that a lot of us are in a position where we can start changing the ways that we think about things, and we can start eliminating some of the biases that we have. And I've really found that educating people about these issues is an excellent way to teach people empathy. A lot of people don't necessarily understand that how greatly this kind of thing impacts people, or how many people leave the industry because they have to deal with these issues every day. So talk to people about the issues you've faced. Talk to people about the things that you've heard here today, the things that you read all the time, and speak up when they do terrible things, please. Get to know people that are different than you. In society in general, we tend to know people that are like us. And in this industry, it's very easy to do that. Very easy. So we need to get to know people that are different than us, that have had different experiences than us, that have different concerns and needs in their careers, and ask them what you can do to help them. Can can you help them get a better job? Can you help put them in touch with a mentor? Can you help put them in touch with a mentee? Remember that bias and discrimination are often subtle. Remember that the story I told you about my grandmother, that kind of thing necessarily doesn't happen anymore. I hope nobody in here is working in a cage. But a lot of the stuff that we deal with on a daily basis are comments that people make that make assumptions about us. I go to conferences a lot and I speak and I stand up on stage and I say, I am a programmer and I've been a programmer for 12 years. And I love what I do and I'm really passionate about the things that I do. And then I'll go to an after party and people will ask me if I'm a project manager. Now, is that necessarily a mean thing? Do people mean to insult me to say that I'm a project manager? No. But the assumption is made that because I'm a woman, because there are more women in project management, that I'm more than likely a project manager and not a programmer. So instead of asking somebody, are you a project manager, ask them, what do you do for a living? What are you really passionate about? What projects are you working on right now? Learn to apologize. My friend Kronda actually has a really awesome analogy for this. So do you remember when we were kids and we had all those drills, the stop, drop, roll drills? What you do when you're on fire? She said it's really great because they drill that into you when you're a kid, because when you're an adult and you're in a situation when you're on fire, you have to remember that you're on fire. You don't necessarily have the thought process that says, now, what should I do now that I'm on fire? Well, I think that I can see that there's a fire extinguisher over there, so I'll walk very calmly and fire extinguish myself off. That's not the kind of reaction we have. We have panic because we are on fire. And apologizing is the same thing. We have somebody that calls us out for something that we've done and we panic. The first thing that we do is we react very badly. A lot of times we make the situation worse, which is unfortunate. So there's 3 steps to apologizing, very simple. What I did was wrong. I'm sorry. If you say but, then stop and start over because that's not an apology. Or if. And make it up by trying not to do that again. Very simple. Advocate for change. I'm very lucky that I have the privilege to stand up and speak before everyone today. That I've had a lot of people that have been very supportive of the research that I'm doing and the things that I'm talking about, that they're willing to sit in chairs and listen to me and willing to bring me to conferences to talk about this. But not everyone else does. Talk about these issues openly. It gives more people the power to stand up when they see that you're doing it. Nobody wants to be the first one. Remember that you can say something as simple as, that's not cool. This is actually my most used tweet on Twitter. And it includes the frowny face every time. It's just enough to tell people, like, what you're doing isn't okay, so you should probably change it. Have the hard conversations in public. I talk to a lot of people about this kind of stuff in public because I want bystanders to see and be able to learn from the situation. Influence change in communities and workplaces. I've been so happy to see how supportive and inclusive this conference has been. So thank you so much. It's amazing. Increase education and access. Help facilitate events for marginalized people in tech. Go to things like Black Girls Code, Latino startups, Rails Bridge, Girl Develop It. There are tons of groups out there. Volunteer at local schools and groups. They almost always want people like us to come in and talk about what we're passionate about. Come in and talk for a half hour, show people how to write basic HTML. Commit financial resources. If you went to an Ivy League school and you write them a check every year, stop it. They don't need any more of your money. Send the money to a technical college that's in your area, a college that serves a marginalized population. Work with colleges and universities and ask them things like, what are you doing to help students who have had less exposure to technology? Remove bias from our schools and universities. There's a really awesome study that was done by Harvey Mudd where they doubled the number of women that graduated from their computer science programs by asking one question in their 101 course, which was, have you programmed before? Being able to remove and put in a different room the people who had programmed before, remove that threat of, these people are way smarter than me. I am never going to be able to catch up. I am not smart enough to do this. Change our workplaces. Think about what your About page looks like right now. When you get a chance, take a look at the Tumblr 100% men and let me know if it looks the same. It's a really, really sad and scary Tumblr, actually. Change your culture. It's a lot harder to retain than recruit diverse people. Think of your culture as a garden. You want a lot of variety, you value variety, you probably don't want an entire garden full of carrots. That's a lot of carrots to eat. And the fact that you want to prune weeds. If there are people in your company that are scaring people away, that are doing, that are saying terrible things to other people, that are making people uncomfortable, please remove them. Vocally support this kind of thing. Be active in the community, create diversity statements and actually follow through on them, attend events and job fairs for marginalized communities. If you're going to job fairs and you aren't hitting up historical Black colleges, women's colleges, that's a huge place to find people. Make sure that your job listing language and requirements actually will help people that are different from you. Remember I said about the number of women that are contributing to open source and the number of women that are actually graduating with computer science degrees. Check the benefits of your company. Are there same-sex partner benefits, trans-inclusive healthcare, maternity leave policies? I don't know how many companies I've talked to, they have no idea what the maternity leave policy is. And make sure that you have things like flex time, which really helps with people who have to deal with things like dependent care or they have to go to regular doctor's visits. I'm going to skip through a couple of these real quick. All right, so now that you've all been deputized, we all have to work on this stuff. And I definitely appreciate the people that have been working on it really hard. I appreciate the people that are going out and they're being good role models for other people. I love that there are so many people that are getting into things like teaching other people to program. But I need everybody's help on this. And I want to know today what we can accomplish together tomorrow. So thank you.